Okay, we got a green light already. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Edina City Hall Council Chambers. It is Wednesday, July 21st, 2022, and this is the meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. We had a city council meeting on Tuesday, and so it's been a busy week for us. Before we start the meeting, our Administrative Support Specialist, Liz Olson, has prepared for us a script that we need to provide the information from to people that might be listening in, whether you're listening in on some of the different mechanisms you can do it, Facebook, streaming, other ways. We want to welcome you to the July 21st meeting. And today we want to let you know that the community comment will be the only time you can participate in the meeting. There is no public hearing this morning. And so if you want to participate in public community comment or public comment, call in at 888-504-7949. The number's up on the screen. And the participant code is there as well. And press *1 on your telephone keypad when you would like to speak. Get in the queue. The operator will bring you into Director Benarat. And then you'll be able to speak when it's your turn to do so. And remember, you can't call in on something that's a matter on the agenda this week or otherwise scheduled for a future public hearing. So with having provided that information, I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask our support specialist, Liz Olson, to call the roll.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton.
Here.
Commissioner Pierce.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. And next is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next is the meeting agenda approval. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the agenda in some form or fashion? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda in its published form?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Staunton, second by Commissioner Pierce to approve the meeting agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the meeting agenda say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Now it is time for community comment. So just a reminder, if you want to call in, that number, that participant number is 888-504-7949. Enter that participant passcode, press *1 on your telephone keypad, and that'll bring you to the operator, who will then bring you to Director Benarat. Actually, Director Benarat is not with us this morning. Dan, thank you. I failed to look up. We've got the support staff here that will take care of that. Bring you in to speak to the HRA. Do we have anybody on the line?
We do not have anyone on the line right now.
Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the HRA on a matter of concern to them under the public comment portion of the agenda? All right, I think we'll give it just a moment and then we'll move on. As is our practice, our executive director usually responds to committee comments from the prior meeting, and I don't think we had any
We did not.
that needed response. So we've got a few items on the consent agenda. Is there anybody on the HRA, any commissioner that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda as shown?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Anderson moves, Commissioner Staunton seconds the adoption of the consent agenda and the items contained therein. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the consent agenda say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And we're down to the heart of the meeting, which is the reports and recommendations portion of the meeting. And Stephanie's going to lead off with a presentation, and then we've got some other folks here as well. So, Ms. Hawkinson, our Affordable Housing Manager, is with us this morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. Right now, it's really not working. Unlike Tuesday night, it's on. All right, I'll manually until plugging the battery in. Solon Companies is proposing a Phase 2 development that will be adjacent to the Fred on 77th that is just south of the Fred Richards Park. This will be called the Fred 2. So today, I am seeking support of the term sheet that we have prepared that will lead to a redevelopment agreement that will come before you in the fall. Due to extraordinary soil conditions, including a high water table, general developmental challenges, the creation of various public access routes to the Fred Richards Park, and the inclusion of affordable housing units, they are seeking a financial gap that will cover the gap between what they can leverage in debt and investment equity and what it costs to develop the project. The project cannot leverage a lot of debt or equity because it's not a luxury building. Even though it's a market rate building, the rents are what we would consider attainable. None of the rents at the beginning are greater than 120% of area median income. And there is affordable rents, and I'll get more into that detail later, but that does create a financial gap. The source of the loan that we are offering is Pentagon Park pooled TIF funds and SPARC funds. And then again, seeking approval of the term sheet. Still does not want to work. We're going to need the microphone. So currently, the site is in the red box. Is a 1960s era office building and a cracked surface parking lot. You can see in the picture there's a lot of surface parking lot in the area. The site to the left is where the Fred is being developed right now, right adjacent and south of the Fred Richards Golf Course and along West 77th. Those red dots indicate bus stops. So it is on an active transit corridor. It's within the greater Southdale area and the Pentagon Park redevelopment area. The proposed development brings 276 new housing units. 28 of them would be affordable at rents that are affordable to households that earn 50% or below area median income. And 110, they have agreed to having an additional 110 to have rents that would not exceed the 120% AMI level for the duration of the note. Currently, though, like I stated, all the rents are affordable at 120% AMI, but with 50% of them, we don't know what the future holds, what energy costs are going to be like, what just maintenance costs are going to be like. So there would be the option, some of those 50% of those units, the rents could exceed, if the market requires it and costs of operating the building require it, exceed the 120. But 50% would be with the affordable units, less than 120. So it's a hybrid type of project that we have not seen before. And then importantly, too, with this development proposal is there are different access points, public access points to the Fred Richards Park. A new road would be developed that would be a gateway for vehicular traffic to the park, and that would be to the east of the building, and I can show a map later on. And then to the west of the building, there's a pedestrian plaza that could also be used, and there's for pedestrians and bicycle traffic will have access. So you probably have seen this slide before, and you will see it again. The proposed, you can see there in the center of the slide, and then the arrows, the north-south arrows indicate where there's access to the park for the public from West 77th. estimated sources and uses, and I want to stress here, this is estimated. This project has not gone out for bid yet. They will use the approval of a term sheet to help with the investors and with the bank financing. Then they will be going out for bid later this summer, early fall. So these numbers are all estimates. Also, I want to point out with this, and it's highlighted in the term sheet, the exact mode of fulfilling the sustainability guidelines has not been determined. They are most familiar, and their contractor is most familiar with LEED. And so the estimates were based off of LEED. That is not set in stone. They may go green communities, and so there could be some fluctuations in those prices. And when I come back in the fall, we'll have it more set. We'll know what the terms of the bank loan are. We'll know what more of the costs are. But these are based on contractor estimates.
And if I could just interrupt briefly, I had a conversation with Commissioner Jackson, who is feeling better, you'll be pleased to know, but couldn't join us this morning. And she wanted me to ask about that issue, so I'm glad you brought it up, because apparently there's different costs that are associated with different tools for verifying the sustainability. And so I think for her, she wanted to make sure we weren't setting that in stone now, and that as it comes back in the fall, we can still drill into that issue.
Chair, Commissioner, yes, that is something that's going to be looked at in the summer. There has been an initial meeting with our sustainability manager, and there is more work to be done in that area. But to create a budget and to know what we're working on, they had to go with a known entity, and the general contractor that's working on the FRED has done LEED certified projects before and was able to give them a good estimate for that. So that's the number that we're using, but we are going to compare it with other formats.
All right, thank you.
So based on the information that we have and based on the underwriting that we can do today, the project is an $85 million project. The equity that can be raised is around 14.5. The debt at 72% of the value is about $61 million. So they are seeking over $9 million in gap financing from the HRA. Of that, 7.4 million would be coming from the TIF pooled funds from the Pentagon Park, and 2 million would come from SPARC. And I can get into more detail on that. So the first source, Pentagon Park TIF District pooled funds. So this site is within the 2014 TIF district that was established to assist with phased redevelopment of the area. So this whole area was included because they needed, the area was deemed ripe for redevelopment. And this is part of that. And so that TIF district was created to help incentivize and leverage development in this area. It would be a pay-go note. It's payable from surplus TIF proceeds that were not committed to the Pentagon Park South. And it would reimburse the developer's extraordinary redevelopment costs specific to the site. So as I mentioned before, soil correction, stormwater, and these are all things that were listed in the redevelopment plan when the TIF district was created. So it does comply with the rationale for the creation of this TIF district. The second source would be SPARC, and this was in the legislative session last year's enabled the transfer of unobligated increment to assist in private development. The City Council approved a spending plan for these SPARC funds in November, and so we are seeking a $2 million forgivable loan. And these funds would be allocated specifically for those access points, for the road between 77th and the Fred Richards Park, and for the pedestrian plaza. I'd like to point out, too, that the plaza, the road and the plaza are connected to the north of the building. Part of that is for fire access routes, so it's a kind of a U around the whole building. And so the SPARC funds would be to support that development and everything associated with the creation of that road.
Could I ask you a question about the road? Just by way of background, I like the way you've potentially set this up. When we talk about that vehicular park road and the use of SPARC funds for the items that you show on slide 10, does that money get used then to purchase that strip of land that will be used for vehicle access to the park, or do we just end up with an easement and then we pay for the cost of putting in the road using those SPARC funds? What's the
Chair
status on
Commissioners,
that?
I may need to be corrected, but my understanding is that is an easement, and we are paying for the improvements on that easement. So the easement and the road is designed to our specifications and the way we want it to connect to the park to fulfill our purposes, but that we will not have title to that parcel. Is that correct? That is correct.
Does that road have any other purpose other than access to the park? Did you just say that it has a purpose for providing a fire lane behind their building?
It does have a purpose for fire lane, and it has a purpose because it's access to the parking for the office buildings that are still remaining.
Oh, to the east. Yeah, I can see that.
What's east and west? So I may have spoke before when I was talking about the U. So the proposed phase 2 is in green. The plaza is immediately to the east. The bike path, am I correct here? The bike path is immediately to the west. And then the road, the access road, is on the other side of the office building on the east.
Yeah, well, your slide 5 does a good job of giving that overall site plan, I think. So the 4600 building remains, and then the building to the east, I can't quite, it says Pentagon Park, it just says, I don't know what the address is, but those two, the notion is those two buildings remain, and they remain office buildings.
Correct.
Thanks, Mr. Kliko and Mr. Gunsbury. So that's why we talk about it in terms of an easement as opposed to you just selling us the land and having the road just be an access point to the park. Okay, because it gets used for multiple purposes, access to the park and access to the parking for those buildings that are both east and west of the roadway. All right, that helps me. Thank you.
So the term sheet, which is what I'm actually here to get approval on. The term sheet was prepared by Jay Lindgren at Dorsey & Whitney with input from Nick at Ellers and the development team. It complies with all state statutes that govern TIF proceeds and SPARC, with the inclusion of Edina's more stringent parameters. Here are the salient points within the term sheet that was included with the staff report. There, like I mentioned in the beginning, there is some flexibility included in the term sheet to account for increasing interest rates and supply chain volatility. I will return in a fall with a redevelopment agreement where this will get tightened up. Interest rates are expected to rise. So return on cost, having that interest set now is a challenge to do. We don't know what's going to happen in interest rates. We knew all last year, both Mr. Neuendorf and I would come before you and say, there's supply chain issues, there's all this volatility, prices are rising. Well, that is true, and that all happened. We are seeing a slowdown in the construction market, in part because of all these issues and these rising costs. So we're noticing that there are some savings in some areas, but costs are still increasing in other areas. So it's still pretty volatile. And once the bids come in and once the bank financing is solidified, we'll be able to tighten up on what some of these return on cost percentages are and share that with you in the fall. So the timeline is they are actually next week going before the Planning Commission for site plan approval, and then that will follow up with City Council soon thereafter. Then bidding throughout the fall and winter and getting some of the financing lined up with construction commencing in July and completion in July of '23 and completion in November of '24. And this is more of the conservative timeline. There are beginnings and ends, and so I took the more conservative approach here. For the public assistance, it must meet the but-for test. And you all know what the but-for test, but for the public assistance, this project will not happen. And the pooled funds, a lot of where that's pooling from would be this development as well as the Fred 1. So some of the pooled funds are coming from the developments that Solem is undertaking. But it still needs to meet the but-for test. The loan terms, as I touched upon, is the SPARC funds would be forgivable, and they would be drawn as construction commences. So when there's a draw request, the monthly draw request by the contractor for elements that pertain to the roads and the access that use the SPARC funds, we would review that, we would see that the work is being done, and approve the draw, and submit the funds to title for payment on those pieces. For the pay-go note, the TIF pooled funds, that would be structured as a traditional TIF pay-go note where a note would be executed upon certificate of completion. No money of that would go out during construction. It'd be issued afterwards, and then there'd be annual installments based on the reporting that we get from them of costs and expenditures. With the pay-go note, we would have the traditional and typical look-back and claw-back provisions in place if the project were to sell, to make sure that no one was becoming unduly enriched on the public dollar. We've also split up how these different sources of funds would be used, as I touched upon. For the TIF pooled funds, the stormwater systems for the project, for the housing project, sustainability, I say certification, it's more clarity, it's the delta between building to code and what would a non-sustainable guideline project would cost versus what it costs to become a sustainable, meet our green criteria, as well as the certification to prove that all the systems are working as intended. The increased cost due to soil conditions, site prep, the fire access road, and our costs. The SPARC funds would be very limited to the pedestrian plaza, the monument signage at the entrance of these access points, the road, the plaza, and the storm system underneath the road and the plaza, and the soil correction in the public areas. So the SPARC funds would be really limited to all the public access points.
It says up to $2 million.
Correct.
If those SPARC elements, those 5 elements you've listed on slide 10 exceed $2 million, is that just the cost that the developer absorbs?
Some of those could spill over to if there's cost savings on what is being supported by the pooled funds. Some of those costs could blend over and be paid for by the TIF pooled source, but it can't go the flow the other way.
But the forgivable loan that we would give would not exceed $2 million?
Correct. That is correct.
Okay. And that's all being done because is it a construction management issue? You know, by that I mean it just makes more sense to reimburse them than to do it ourselves and not have to go through the rigmarole of having a forgivable loan. So, you know, we get the easement, we build our own road, we do our own public improvements, and, you know.
Chair Commissioners, as I understand, yes. It's part of the efficiencies of doing that, and since we don't own the road, and we're having an easement over it, and the way the regulations based on the source of funds that is being used. But I don't know, Nick, if you have something to add to that?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Nick Anhut with Ehlers and Associates. I think it is a acquisition issue. The fact that it's going to be part of private development, we will be able to impose through this agreement standards on what is actually built, but it will be conveyed as an easement as a private development cost. I think we anticipate that if it were a public improvement, it would be a much more costly and less efficient construction. So we're attempting to bridge and get to the same place at a more efficient level as part of a private development expense.
All right. And so to the extent that the SPARC funds are inadequate to make these public improvements you're showing on slide 10, and we shift some of those monies needed over to make those improvements from the TIF pooled funds, are these 5 elements that you show on slide 10 for use of SPARC funds also TIF eligible expenses?
Correct. We believe that all of these elements are TIF eligible, but we're working with a limited amount of dollars and money.
Yeah.
So we're not opening the avenue to provide more funding. We're setting up to amounts, but if those costs do exceed $2 million, they will be eligible within the broader array of other items to be paid from the TIF pooled funds. But we're not anticipating that that would then exceed the total amount that we're committing. So
Okay.
if
Yeah.
there are cost savings, then we'll reduce, but we are making those expenses eligible under the TIF note as well in case there are overruns.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned early on. I thought it was creative. That's the reason I thought it was so creative. And you've kept us well under the 10% mark on the use of the TIF pooled funds relative to the total projected cost of the project.
Correct.
Correct. That was intentional, and it was also, as Mr. Anhut said, that we have a limited supply of the TIF pooled funds. So we can only, so this term sheet is a not to exceed. Mm-hmm. There may be cost savings, and we are seeking some flexibility for the overruns of the public elements to be paid for by the TIF pooled funds, but it would still be a not to exceed cap number, and then within each source.
Okay, are you ready for questions beyond me?
I have more presentation,
All right, go
but
ahead,
if you
go
want
ahead,
to
okay.
jump ahead, I'm more than happy
go
to
ahead.
do so. Just the public benefits. I know that we don't want to put in TIF funding or any source of funding unless there is a public benefit. And again, I want to reiterate the uniqueness of this project on both complying with the affordable housing policy as well as agreeing to commit additional 40% of the units to be permanently or during the term of the note attainable. That they have agreed to not increase those rents to above 120% of area median income. We have not seen this in a project before. But all of them, again, initially are attainable units. This is not a luxury building. It'll be lovely, but it's not priced at luxury rents. Will it be adhere to our sustainability policy? It does provide that access. It also has access to multiple modes of transportation. It is not a car-dependent development, having all those bus stops nearby as well as bike trails. So it is really encouraging and supportive of multimodal transportation. And based on next week is the site plan with the Planning Commission, as I mentioned, but based on the sketch plan, it seems to adhere to the Southdale Design Experience guidelines. That was it. I just had one more slide.
Good. I'm going to turn first to Commissioner Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is laid out very well. I have a couple of questions really around the TIF, and this is probably more definition of terms. So there, as you describe this, you've used the term limited supply of funds. Then on a slide, there's a surplus of funds. And then on, I think slide, when we talk about SPARC, that is capped at 2 million. And so I just want to understand, like, when we say there's a surplus of funds, just describe and it's probably describing the construct of TIF, where the funds are coming from and how they're being allocated.
It's the SPARC portion, but you can explain where SPARC comes from.
Well, I think this body established the Pentagon Park TIF district. It is a current certified TIF district. It is collecting increment as we speak. It involves properties on the north and south of this broader area. The HRA has only committed to using the increment generated from the Pentagon South project towards other financial obligations. You have not committed to using any of the increment created from the redevelopment of the north parcels. Sorry, on the north of 76th Street, or 77th Street, excuse me. We anticipate with this development, both Fred 1 and Fred 2, that there's going to be new tax generation. There's going to be new revenue created within this TIF district that is not otherwise committed. But you are limited in how you can use that revenue. By statute, you can only commit 25% of the broader TIF district towards new redevelopment projects. So that is the limiting factor. We think that that increment is limited to about $7.5 million in total when we combine looking at the broader development pattern for the entire Pentagon Park TIF district. But we do have other tools that you have created, the SPARC fund, to help pay for types of public improvements that benefit, or I'm sorry, private development that benefit the public. And so that's where we see that there are elements to this development that meet the criteria of the SPARC fund. We are limiting that only $2 million is used for that because those can be more broadly used for development across the city. But I think the limiting factor is the pooling, actually, is what we have limited access to, if that helps.
And then in the pool, that's when we're saying surplus, there are funds there that are just not committed, but are available.
Correct. They would be collected within the TIF district. They would be available to service redevelopment within Pentagon Park.
Yeah.
But they are otherwise not, at this point in time, otherwise not committed. Now, we're relying on this new development to create them. Mm-hmm. But we are confined within the statute for how we can use these dollars from an existing TIF district.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Staunton.
Just to follow up, so is that because we didn't start this project within 5 years of creating the district?
Correct, Commissioner Staunton. There are some parameters put in place by the statute. When you establish a new TIF district, you have to incur a financial obligation to use those future dollars within 5 years.
Okay.
This body did that for the South development, but due to a variety of different circumstances, the other phases of development within that TIF district did not happen within that time frame.
But we can use stuff within the district, but the increment that gets created, we can use a certain portion of it after.
So if it is an obligation after 5 years, you are capped. You are capped that you can only utilize 25% of the total for other types of redevelopment activity that occur after that 5 years. And so we've done the math.
Yeah.
We've backed into this amount. That's our limiting factor. About $7.5 million is what we think you can safely commit to this project or similar projects within Pentagon Park. And then the SPARC would essentially serve as increasing the amount that's necessary to bring the entire development project forward, including the improvements to access the park.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Anderson.
Okay, thank you. Where to start here? So it's the access, Mr. Anhut. sorry. So the access to the pooled TIF funds, we're essentially accessing the Pentagon Park South TIF district in order to create this roughly 7.5. Is that accurate?
This project is within the Pentagon Park TIF district.
Well, there's a south and a north, right?
Correct, south of 77th Street.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and so there was a TIF district created for that. There was one in 2014, I believe. Then my recollection.
It's the same TIF district. This is in
For both
place today
sides.
on both sides.
And
of
what's
the
the length of that? I thought that was the north side was being decertified relatively quickly, but that's not the case.
There is, you could choose to
Well,
decertify it.
what was the length, the term of the original TIF district there?
2043.
Okay, all right. Then thank you. That's an academic question. Okay. Then I wonder if you know, or if Ms. Hawkinson knows, the status of the easement. Has that been granted? Is that in negotiation? Where do we stand on that with Hillcrest and the developer, who I believe that's where the negotiation has been?
If I may ask Tony Glico to... Our attorney is on vacation right
Sure.
now, so I am depending on...
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Commissioner Anderson, Hillcrest or Pentagon North, who will still own 4,600, so there'll be a division of the lot. So Fred 2 will be what we call 4620, the current building. Going east is 4,600, then between 4,600 and 4,570, again going east, that's where their road will be. So Pentagon North / Hillcrest, along with Solheim, has agreed to grant that easement. We have not been in negotiations on the terms of it, but Scott Tankett and Mark Roundhorse have said yes, that's part of the deal as part when we sell that lot. But with the understanding that we've committed with the city that there'll be a permanent easement. The details of it will be constructed by Solheim, but the details of maintenance and this and that will have to be discussed. But the granting will occur about when we close on the TIF piece.
Okay, I'm just trying to clarify the chair's question relative to the potential of the city controlling the access to Fred Richards. In the event that for any reason that this project didn't occur, we can see that expense is a significant consideration, and we all recognize that construction costs are continuing to move upward. If this 7.5 or so didn't cover it, then where do we wind up? And that's not maybe germane to this. It's in general a question because the $2 million to me is pretty straightforward. This is a significant benefit, but still linked to the project. So I'm trying to determine the status of that. If it's not under control of the developer at this point, then it's a consideration, that's all.
It's a very good point. So analogy would be to the Pentagon South. When the TIF district was 2014, the Pentagon South redevelopment agreement would set forth the tax increment use for Pentagon South. As part of that redevelopment agreement had contingencies. The conditions were for, I'll use Hillcrest or Pentagon South to convey to the city both the parking facility easement and the plaza easement. I would guess Jay and I and the group would work through that as part of that contract for private redevelopment, that Pentagon North would have to be a party to that in some way, shape, or form, or Solheim would have to deliver that easement as part of the conditions with respect to that contract for private redevelopment for generation and use of the $7.5 million and the SPARC funds. So the analogy would be the delivery would be at that point in time.
Okay.
So Hillcrest would have to, probably, I don't know if there'll be a party, but that would have to be a party to the easement. It would have to be conveyed and delivered at the time. I think we'd use the same concept we used with Pentagon South, where a big condition of that was that's a public ramp and a public plaza, and those easements had to be delivered along with as condition for delivery of the TIF, if that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for
You're
your help there. Okay. Then basically, people are watching, and there will be or can be confusion about these types of matters. And so basically what we are doing here, the request is to access the $7.5 or so million that it's already in an existing TIF district and simply apply it to a project that is proposed within the TIF district.
Correct.
Correct. We're not creating a new one.
We are not creating a new TIF
We're simply
district.
exercising the ability to use the funds in the district to apply to development in the district.
That is correct.
Thank you. Okay, I don't think then, I don't have anything else. Thank you.
And so what you're seeking here today is a motion to approve these elements that you've discussed that would be incorporated in a term sheet, which is a non-binding term sheet for the FRED 2 and authorize, and the HRA authorizing staff to go to work with our financial and legal advisors to create an acceptable redevelopment agreement, which would be a binding agreement.
Chair, Commissioners, that is correct.
Yep. And so what you're asking us to do is put our blessing on the fact that you're heading in the right direction, because it's a non-binding decision that we'd make today relative to what would be probably a tri-party agreement.
Chair, that is correct. And the term sheet, as it's being drafted, it's the scaffolding for the future redevelopment agreement. So the terms that are stated in the term sheet would be reflected in the final redevelopment agreement. So it was to give you a preview of what the redevelopment agreement would look like. And so if you had issues with the terms within the term sheet, we could address those now prior to foisting those on you in the fall when a decision needed to be made. Excuse me.
All right, good. Thanks. That cause any further inquiry from anybody? All right. So we've got a staff recommendation to approve the term sheet for the FRED 2 and authorize our staff to work with financial and legal advisors and the property owners and the developer to create an acceptable redevelopment agreement. Is there a commissioner that cares to make that motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? All right, we got a motion and a second on the motion as stated. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Good. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for being here this morning. All right, HRA Commissioner comments. The other night at City Council, I think we started with the man who wears two hats, Commissioner and Council Member Anderson. We'll do the reverse this morning. We'll start with Commissioner Pierce.
I don't have any comments this morning. Thank you.
Commissioner Staunton.
Nothing for me either, thanks.
And we all still feel bad about your dog.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is true.
That's been a lot of
Today,
talk at our house.
today would have been 16 years, right?
Today he was, yeah. All right. Commissioner Anderson.
Nothing from me, Mr. Chair.
All right. And I don't have anything either. Our Executive Director, any comments?
Nothing from me, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
We got a motion by Commissioner Staunton, second by Commissioner Anderson to adjourn the HRA meeting for this, what did we say this was? The 21st day of July, 2022. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. We stand adjourned.